why don't we get started with the very first topic, healthcare topic. So how has COVID-19 affected and shifted the healthcare companies, and your company in particular, but in terms of your business model, what has it changed? How have you shifted and how have you changed because of COVID?
I'm happy to jump in here first. Thank you so much for hosting. I really appreciate it, and for the wonderful blurb and everything at the beginning. But I really hate to say that COVID has actually been quite beneficial for our business. As you might imagine, a company that is able to collect aggregated electronic medical records is in high demand right now, especially as we're seeing a huge shift of the industry moving to telemedicine, to direct consumer pharmacies, and care coordination platforms for people who have comorbidities with coronavirus. Those are all the companies that we were originally marketing to, and now with this becoming a bigger deal, and with a lot more people exploring those options for their own personal treatment, they've come to us, and it's been great. We've been offering them great deals. Anything for the treatment of coronavirus, we've been offering free of charge during the pandemic, just to help out as best as we can. We'll worry about getting money later down the road. But yeah, we're definitely seeing a fundamental shift in the way that primary care is being delivered to patients. And I don't suspect we'll go back to where it was before. I suspect that telemedicine is here. We've crossed the cusp of it being acceptable for insurance companies to support it and actually pay out for it, and any number of other things. And I think, yeah, it's great. I mean, I've personally used telemedicine a number of times to get treatment or prescriptions or things like that filled, and it's been spectacular. I think overall it's going to be a net win years to come once everything settles down.
And Sid?
I'll jump in there too, Dan. Thanks, Dan. I think just to echo what Dan said, working in healthcare, this is kind of like your I told you so moment, right? Whether you were working towards telehealth or different categories that obviously we as health tech entrepreneurs believe strongly in for years, now it's very clear where the market is heading. And I think anyone in healthcare has experienced this moment of what we like to call pandemic market fit, if you will. And in healthcare, I think it's a very empowering moment in time for us. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be in healthcare tech or health tech in general. And for us as a company, a little bit about Truepill, our core business is around pharmacy fulfillment through the mail and telehealth through a set of APIs. And so when you think about being able to see a provider or a physician online, or then getting your medications through the mail, those are two core fundamental aspects of what you need to power in a world where people are not seeing their doctors traditionally or going into a normal pharmacy. And so I think the evidence has been in the last 3 months, certainly the record best months in the history of our company. And I think that's going to continue. And as Dan mentioned, even fast forwarding to a world post-COVID, or we get back into this new normal world, it's very clear that the underlying infrastructure to support an entire healthcare system shifting over to telehealth overnight, it's not there yet. And for all of us in health tech, I think that presents a huge opportunity. And for us specifically at Truepill, it's making sure our telehealth, our pharmacy, and if we get into lab testing and other areas, those core underlying infrastructure pieces, they're ready for telehealth. And I think as a startup, our biggest opportunity today is just our ability to move fast. That's inherently a startup superpower. And I think what we all know about healthcare is that it moves very slow. And for us, that gives us all a competitive edge and competitive advantage. And when the whole market is moving faster than we've ever seen before, it's a great time for really startups to emerge and capture a lot of market share in our respective businesses as we continue to try to grow.
I know we're going to sort of come back to this broad topic, so I'll save some things, but I want to pass on a quote from a friend of mine who is the chief AI officer of one of the largest insurance companies, health insurance companies in the country. And he said, very simply, he said, look, because of COVID, we've got two kinds of physicians now. We've got physicians that embrace and use telemedicine, and we've got physicians that are retired. Okay, that's literally what he said. Well, retiring, I should say. They are retiring. This is a monumental change, and it's a change that's occurred over 4 months, and it probably accelerated the projections that folks had, including myself, for the market for telehealth and other forms of modern medicine, a modern incarnation of medicine, and brought that from 6 years to 2 months. It's just unbelievable how much change has occurred. It's easy to look at it in telehealth because you ask people, oh, do you use telehealth? And you do a survey of what percentage of people use telehealth 4 months ago versus now, and it's gone from 5% to 90% or 80% of the folks in a number of primary care practices. Great, that's easy to do. It's a lot deeper than that, and I think we'll explore that as we go through the evening.
Yeah, that's totally right. I think we've used the term that in the last sort of 3 months, we've seen what it normally takes about 5 or 10 years in the healthcare industry to accomplish, and that is massive shifts that we're all kind of adjusting to and reacting to almost every single day now. So it's a fun time.
Yeah, there's one statistic that I'll reference, and it comes from One Medical, which is a chain of close to 100 primary care physician offices around the country, with epicenters in San Fran and New York, and then the rest of the last third would be scattered around the country in 15 or 20 cities. 5% of their visits prior to COVID were televisits, and they were done by a group of doctors that did nothing but dedicate themselves to televisits. And the in-person doctors, the regular doctors that people would see, no, we don't do telehealth. That's for the telehealth group. We visit people in the office. That shifted like that. And now everybody does telehealth. And if you want a telehealth visit, you get a telehealth visit with the doctor that you normally work with in most cases. It just changed the company completely. And their business model, which was part of the question, therefore changed as well, because with all those offices and a small group of telehealth people, they could handle X number of patients, okay? Where the gating factor, the bottleneck, if you will, was the number of physical offices they had and number of rooms to meet with people. That's no longer relevant. Yes, there's a gating factor to some extent, but now they have maybe 30%, I'm making up a number, 30% more capacity for members, which pay them a monthly fee for the opportunity to visit One Medical. So it's a big boost to this company's particular profitability, and I think other companies as well who are positioned as such.
And that, that makes sense. I mean, let me ask you a quick question, because one of the things about what has actually also spurred the adoption of telehealth is that CMS has started reimbursing for these telehealth visits, right? And I think they continue to, their goal is to actually continue supporting it after COVID. So basically making this, permanent. That said, I talked to a number of doctors who actually, my sister is a doctor, and what she was saying is the reimbursement for telehealth visits are a fraction of what they would get. So do you anticipate or see that maybe at some point the reimbursement for telehealth visits will be an increase in that reimbursement, or do we think, because I think in order for that to be sustained, the reimbursement needs to be increased, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can start on that, right? I think that the right question here is, I think it's a big deal that the reimbursement is happening to begin with, right? I think it's taken years to get to this point that CMS would cover it. I think that Doctor on Demand reported the most recent stat here that I think 50% of their visits were done over telehealth. I think they reported that publicly last year, for example. But when you think about that in totality, the years they've been in business to get to 50% coverage through mostly commercial payers, and now for CMS to enter the market, look, I would say that you have to look at it on a blended basis. You're going to have reimbursement rates that are going to be across the board from CMS to private carriers. It's no different than what you experience in the pharmacy world of different payers reimbursing you different amounts. Yeah. I think healthcare, you have to get used to this world of a blended average or blended averaged out bucket, and understand how to operate within those efficiencies. I think today we're still in the early phases of understanding. If you dial it back and look at the intent of lower reimbursement, there's an implicit understanding there that it's more efficient to get through more visits. And so I think we're still in the early phases of understanding what that ROI calculation looks like. How long do you need to spend on telehealth for a visit to qualify for the reimbursement? What makes for a clinically relevant or appropriate visit in terms of length and quality of care? All that is being figured out. But I think we can't understate the fact that just getting to kind of blanket reimbursement is a big, big deal and a monumental shift in telehealth. And it only gets better from here as we start to understand different specialty areas and sort of precedent for, does each specialty visit reimbursed differently than a primary care visit, and what constitutes one or the other. And so I'm a pretty optimistic guy. So I tend to look at it from a positive lens of, this is a big deal and we'll continue to push forward.
It be because of, I guess, Adam Smith's invisible hand or capitalism, whatever you want to say, if there's discrepancy, which actually has gotten narrowed dramatically during this COVID era, and hopefully it's going to continue to be a relatively narrow differential between the price for a tele and a regular visit. But if that gap gets big again, all it's going to do, given the acceptance of telehealth by patients, integration by doctors of telehealth into their offices, I think we'll see a number of things occur, like people getting shifted to accountable care organizations and other ways to get paid, so that they will get care like all you can eat, and it will be a very affordable thing. But also, doctors who are providing that care will get paid more than they would on the normal reimbursement, because they're participating in the benefit of keeping people well.
Yeah.
I can't give examples, but this is the kind of thing that is natural to happen.
And John, actually, now that I'm glad you brought up the whole accountable care organization and shifting. So do you think from this perspective, we're going to start seeing a shift into more global payment, global capitation, kind of back into what we almost call like managed care, where a provider is actually getting paid per member per month, and so they have a sustainable or predictable reimbursement?
I don't know how doctors, regular old-fashioned doctors, who treat people with diabetes, among, if not the most chronic condition that we have for people's, and certainly it's the biggest thing because it lasts so long in people's life. How can a doctor compete with Livongo or another digital health company that's continually monitoring somebody's blood glucose and advising them with relatively inexpensive people, be they people on the other end of the phone, coaches, or AI bots? They can't. And you know what? Livongo has better outcomes than doctors. And Livongo is just the tip of the iceberg. I bring it up not because I think they're the be all and end all. I think they're a great example of what's to come. And it is, in effect, an accountable care organization, okay? Because they've changed the payment model. They're not getting fee for service. It's a different game. And they have better outcomes, which is the ultimate goal.
I'll add one thing to John there, and then let Dan chime in here as well, that this shift in the business model can actually be a huge opportunity for startups, right? I think as you begin to understand where you can take on the risk on your model to switch away from fee for service to actually get to value-based payments, is actually a huge upside opportunity in terms of if you can understand and risk model your outcomes or the benefits of your kind of what you're offering, and you can take on some risk. I think a lot of the parties that we engage with today on the health plan side and larger organizations, it usually starts off as a fee for service in the early phases, but we're actually very quickly moving into what does a value-based care model look like. And the reason for that is very simple, right? When we're working with a large health plan and they're going to kind of signal a problem, they'll come to you with a very specific problem and say, look, we're spending $1 billion this year on flu-related hospitalizations. Might be that specific a problem. They'll come back and say Truepill or whatever vendor they're using or company saying, we need to design a specific program and we're going to pay you X. Now, as long as X is less than $1 billion and their ultimate cost in terms of hospitalizations yields to less than $1 billion the following, call it flu season, they're ROI positive. Now, the tricky part is they're not always transparent is how much they actually saved in terms of that calendar year with the solution you brought to market. But if you dial into understanding how much savings you brought in, you can start to see where this actually creates huge upside and opportunity as a startup to change your model from fee for service to value-based care to tap into the upside. So I think you can always look at it from try to capture the maximal upside. And that's more from a startup lens that we kind of take that approach.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other interesting trends that we've been seeing feels like there's a large push or an upcoming surge of wearable devices and the potential to be reimbursed for like prescribing an application or a wearable device and application associated with that. And I know there's like a ton of startups in that space right now, like developing that hardware and working on the clinical trials to prove efficacy of these devices specifically for the purposes of getting reimbursed in the future. So we got some really interesting times ahead from that perspective. I know like we're looking into what can be done with that data from an aggregate sense as well to provide better outcomes.
Yeah, that's a great point. The digital therapy space, not just hardware alone, there are software only FDA approved applications that it's interesting the way this world works. And we dispense a couple of these digital therapies, one in not sleep apnea, but insomnia, and one in substance abuse or opioid addiction. And what's super fascinating in that world is, although there's no physical pill or tablet at the end of the road that's dispensed, you still have to go through traditional pharmacy workflows. There's a doctor that has to write the prescription. There's a pharmacist that has to verify that prescription. But in a tech world, it all gets it just changes the model. Now, approving the prescription at the pharmacy means sending a callback to our customer with an unlock code for the app, which is a very different mental model than the usual world of putting a pill in a bottle and dispensing it out. And so I think that, yeah, the whole digital therapy space is extremely fascinating, whether it's wearables or even software only, or this whole new concept of companion apps where you bundle a therapy, a physical pill, with an app to kind of yield better clinical outcomes. So lots and lots of innovation there as well that's happening right before our eyes.
So that's great. So beyond what we just discussed, are there other business models or any other technology company that you think that has that will benefit from this?
I'll make a very general point.
Okay.
It's normal that we see innovation bringing about a brand new product, and I don't care what market you're looking at. So often technology, that's my focus, but an innovation of some kind brings about a brand new product or service, and immediately it's met by huge barriers from the status quo who resist the change because their models are not set up to deal with that. It's a threat. In healthcare, these barriers to change are nothing short of monumental. There are regional monopolies of hospitals. There's oligopolies in insurance and ambulances and blood testing, elder care, among many other things. There are powerful lobbyist groups. I'll call them labor groups representing the special interests of doctors and nurses and other workers. All of whom would like there not to be, and I say this in an absolute sense, please respect that it's not true in an absolute sense, but I'm trying to make a point. All of them would like there to be nothing, no change at all, because any change undermines their position or the way that they've been doing things. Now, to make it even worse, we're really talking about our health, making us even more conservative to change as a society. So there's a lot of support for this, gee, don't change anything. Now, we've talked about telehealth and a few other things and how COVID has changed that, forcing patients and really the entire health system to embrace telehealth, at least at the moment. I've never seen the status quo be forced to change so quickly. And we've echoed that, a number of us on this panel. Beyond patients, the COVID catalyst has triggered the acceptance of the entire medical system of new things, of change. And this is my point. It's not telehealth. I think that anything in modern healthcare is now on the table as not having near the barrier of to change that they had before. Because I look at the change we can easily articulate and identify with COVID and say, you know, it's really about Livongo bringing a completely different way of treating patients and valuing it at a very high price because their outcomes are now recognized to be as good as they are. And we have plenty of companies that are, they're literally thousands of startup companies, many thousands in healthcare, all trying to go after this very broad thing that I talk about. And they're all salivating. The amount of money flowing into this business has never been seen like this. It's really crazy. That's what I wanted to say here.
Yeah, John, you mentioned a point earlier on capitalism, right? Isn't it amazing how a threat to your core business model is what gets everyone to start moving so quickly? It's like once your world gets flipped upside down, the same folks that you saw kind of sitting on their heels and digging in deeper, they're forced to switch because now their lives depend on it. And that's, you know, in some ways that's the beauty of capitalism, that once you face that threat, you will move. You will move.
And plenty of large companies are going to go out of business. Plenty. I don't know. I don't care which ones, really. And I'm not spending any time trying to figure out which ones because I'm focused on the young disruptors.
Yeah, and I think it's a great spot for all of us, right? I think that theme in general, going back to being nimble and flexible and fast, that is the competitive advantage right now in a world that chronically just can't do it. And now it's an existential risk that they're facing.
Yep.
So
just bouncing off of some of the fundamental shifts that we're seeing, and this might be a little anecdotal just based on my network, my company and other things, is I'm seeing a lot of a push for more treatment options for mental health. I know that during the lockdown, like everybody has been going through stressors that they have never had to go through for such long periods of time. We were all hoping that the lockdown would last for a few weeks and kind of mentally prepped ourselves for that. But as we're seeing, it's dragging on, and many people are like witnessing the passing of loved ones or the suffering of loved ones as a result of this pandemic. So I'm kind of hoping that there will be more and more available mental health options for people, like remote mental health options, as well as a reduction in the stigma around mental health treatment. At least that's what it appears to be coming from, like just anecdotally from my network.
Here.
And I have a quick question for you. We were talking about blockers. One of the biggest blockers are basically like the EHRs, and then also some of the, in terms of data interoperability and opening up data. Are you finding that with what's going on now, there's more acceptance and willingness to open up that pipe?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And to preface this and add a little bit more context, there's been a huge push from a policy perspective recently to open up this data and actually make it usable to empower patients. And so there's a few pieces. One of them is TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, which is going through its final motions right now, which is standardizing the reasons for why people need to share electronic medical records, and more specifically, the technical framework for how they go about accomplishing this. So it's defining qualified health information networks. It's qualifying the exact format of the data, which is FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource version R4, which is a fantastic improvement over the past versions of this medical data. So you're getting this like very well-structured, well-known and understood format of the data that's very easy to work with compared to previous iterations like HL7v2 and the CDA format. And so from that standpoint, like the barriers to entry to utilizing this medical data are being reduced. And at the same time, you're seeing a huge push for anti-information blocking. So effectively more power to the HIPAA rules, enabling patients to request and use their electronic medical records for their own benefit. So from those two standpoints, like things have been improving quite considerably. And one of the aspects that has been kind of working nicely in parallel with the response to the pandemic, has been a huge push to open up these data silos specifically for public health policy. So being able to get aggregate statistics over regions and being able to use that for treatment and coordination of macro care across the board. So with the data silos being opened up for that, they're proving that it can be done for all these other like patient requests for access coming up. And so I suspect like by the end of this year, like the November timeframe, you're going to start seeing these data silos having opened up completely for patient request for access, which could be powering or making easier your telemedicine visits, making it easier to acquire direct-to-consumer pharmacy prescriptions, as well as make it easier for you to get prescriptions for your applications, or being able to leverage your existing medical record data in those applications for treatment of chronic conditions.
Yes, that's a great point, Dan, that I'd love to learn more about that actually from you on, once this legislation passes, do folks like Epic and Cerner, do they move on it or they sit on it for 2 years, right? That's the other challenge of like new tech standards get rolled out, but then if the incumbents don't move, they still hold and trap a lot of that data. How do you think this plays out once legislation does pass? How fast does the world move?
Great question. So we're members of a group called Care Equality, and we're already seeing like the Epics and the Cerners and the Allscripts and the Athena Healths of the world moving towards this policy. They're already opening up for like public health queries, and effectively they're going to be legislated or required by policy to in February of next year as part of the anti-information blocking. So this is one of the interesting pieces of policy that seems to be getting support from both sides of Congress at this point, which is fascinating. All the legislation's there, all the policy is more or less set in stone at this point. And the most promising sign is that these groups are actively working towards it already, with the expectation that it's becoming online. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even wait until the deadline and they were opening up even prior to that. So the future is really bright as far as healthcare data is going.
Yeah, that's cool to see, because that ties in so neatly into telehealth, because one of the biggest questions that you'll commonly get is, well, what if I go see a telehealth provider for this area? Or what if I go online and get a lab test? How does my existing doctor learn about that? Or how does this lab test company A or telehealth company B know about my other medications or conditions? Well, outside of them asking you the screening questions and the clinical questions, which they do, you can see how this all ties in together neatly. And yeah, we should definitely talk offline on how players like a SureScripts kind of sit right in the middle, and they could become a intermediary between pharmacy and EMR, and you could start thinking about very new use cases there as it ties to telehealth. So lots of cool
absolutely
ideas there.
Yeah, like there's so much interesting stuff you can do around there, like especially around like medication adherence. So being able to give feedback to your doctor, like, are you actually taking the medication that's being prescribed for you, or are you just not even picking it up from the pharmacy? Like all these things that like could drastically affect the outcome of your care.
Yeah. Are you familiar with, Dan, and just for maybe everyone else in the audience, this concept of an eligibility check inside an EMR or a pharmacy system of hitting the network to find out what their insurance details or what a patient's insurance details are, right? And if you extend that same concept by proxy to say, I've got an existing patient, here's Dan, tell me where all his EMR records are even, right? And being able to pull that in. If this is the early stages of something like that, and now there's a world where I could provide a patient identifier and get back global health records or cross-network health records, whoever solves that has got.
Yeah, this is all TEFCA and the Qualified Health Information Network.
This is a huge deal. This is a huge deal. And hopefully it will get voted on soon, because if it doesn't, it may, you just don't know. It's really unpredictable when you're dealing with Washington and hoping they pass something, as I learned a year and a half ago.
The nice thing is it's all coming from the Office of the National Coordinator, so it doesn't even necessarily need voting at this point.
Really? So this is not going to get congressional approval and all that stuff. This is just coming from.
I'm obviously not a legislator or a policy genius in any way, shape, or form, but I'm pretty sure the legislation's in place already, and now they're just finishing writing the policy, given feedback from the overall industry, and everyone has been more or less on board with it.
Yeah,
I mean,
like all the comments are public and everything, so it's kind of fascinating to like read through and see what all the big players are responding to, the various pieces of the policy. Great evening read. Fall asleep fast.
Read it and then we'll talk. Right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I will say though, given I would think that Epic and all these EMRs and EHRs would be open to this, because one of the things, besides providing the data out, it's also actually getting the data in, right? Being able to integrate and pulling in all the lab data and medication data, especially given the fact that all the doctors tend to just spend 80% of their time on an EHR and EMR. It actually gives these medical record vendors more power than not.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and yeah, I'm just waiting and holding my breath to just see how this all plays out. It's like the most fascinating time to be in health IT right now.
Yeah, I agree. So actually, one of the things that we had talked about before was how this COVID has actually shifted the power to the consumer. And do you guys want to talk a little bit about that and what you think?
Who wants to take that one? I can take a quick stab at it. Yeah, I mean, we've been very fortunate as an infrastructure company to power a number of these direct-to-consumer experiences. When you look on the outside world and use a site like a Nurex or a GoodRx or a HIMSS, for example, for any one of your like treatment areas, in all likelihood, you'll get a package from Truepill from one of our pharmacy facilities at your home. And we're sort of the backbone behind a number of these direct-to-consumer brands. And so very, very much in alignment with your point there, that consumerization of healthcare is at an all-time high. And where we're seeing this like kind of trickle over is obviously COVID was an accelerator of all that. And we've seen sort of record growth for a number of these direct-to-consumer lab testing companies as well that sell you at-home lab testing kits. And so both those areas have culminated in sort of the health plan starting to realize that a bunch of forces have hit them, right? They talk constantly about this problem of leakage, where for them, when a member leaves their network to use a GoodRx coupon, that's great for the patient, but the health plan actually leaks that member out. And so how can you retain that member within your walls, and how do you build experiences for them? It's forcing the largest and call it the least consumer-friendly entities in the world to start to take notice of, if they don't react accordingly, they're going to just bleed out to the HIMSS of the world and the Nurex of the world, because patients are demanding this experience, and it is frankly a 10x better experience. So why would you go back to the traditional way your health plan forces it, even if it means, by the way, paying out of pocket? And that's what's really fascinating here, is that patients are willing to, in many cases, pay out of pocket with their own cash and not go through their health benefit just because it's 10 times better. And to me, that's like a humongous shift in terms of willingness to pay and sort of mind share shift on. It's catching everyone by, I wouldn't say surprise, but it's like it's catching people to realize they need to move quickly to address it before it becomes too big a problem.
You know, I think that all we really need for us to not complete, because we'll probably never complete, but move from being a patient, and historically a patient is somebody who is in need of help, and they go to a doctor who has all the answers because they're the ones who were trained, and there's no Google or anything like that historically. And the doctor you go to is your doctor because your doctor was the only one that knew you and knew your conditions and knew your family and everything else. Basically, in today's parlance, that doctor had the data on you. And we're leaving that world. That's done. We're going to a consumer world, consumer-centric healthcare. And it's going to be a very different world with sensors and all sorts of other things. But the key to making the shift, I think, is number one, the convenience of having really good healthcare in the consumer's mind when he or she wants it and in the way they want it. And that means asynchronous, meaning texting. It's a perfectly good experience for a lot of things. It means sending photos and getting a message back after it's been analyzed, probably by AI, but whatever, you have confidence in it. It means a telemedicine visit. It means an in-person visit in the cases where you really need it. Your choice of in-person may be a little different because it may be very narrow. You may want not just a gastroenterologist, you want a gastroenterologist with a specialty in tropical diseases, because a regular one doesn't deal with that much. So why waste your time with those that are mainly doing other things? But convenience of care when you want it. The portability of your data is critical so that that doctor experience, however it's going to be, can be rich and can be as good as you'd like it to be, because the doctor now knows about you. He's got your data, or she's got your data. And finally, I think a really critical element to this, and you mentioned GoodRx, they're moving along this line, is price transparency. We need to know what things cost. And right now, you can't find it. The government's gone through two levels of demanding price transparency with hospitals, neither of which is really good. We're getting there. They're on it. And I give the administration a lot of kudos for doing what they're doing in that regard. Price transparency, availability and portability of data, which TEFCA is all about, and that's a great, great thing. And finally, the availability of convenient care when you want it in a trusted way. Man, I think all the elements are here. It's going to take some time, but COVID gave this all a major shot in the arm.
Could not agree more with everything you just said.
Yeah.
Well, let's get it to happen fast.
It happen faster, yeah. If we just could. It's crazy when you mentioned this. We've been, I was smiling because we've been chatting internally about, we anchored our entire business around the concept of being patient first, and we're thinking about dropping the word patient and swapping it for consumer. And it's spot on that. I think patient has some like connotations for some reason that we need to go away from for the industry, and brings up good points.
It's passive, and you want active people. You want
patient implies sort of sickness, and that's not necessarily the world that people don't want to associate with themselves with sickness. And so I think consumer is. You gave us a nudge there, so we're going to take that one back, Joe.
That's all I can do.
Yeah, it's funny. You were mentioning price transparency, and something as simple as, we live in a world where we are used to Amazon Prime for everything, and I explain this to people from a fundamental level of how difficult it is to show someone the price of their prescription drug when they use insurance, just because of how the claim processors kind of adjudicate a claim and tell you what your out-of-pocket copay is. Mm-hmm. And you kind of balance this against an e-commerce experience. Like, how do you build an Amazon-like experience when you can't show someone the price of the product, right? And that's the challenge that you face in healthcare and in e-commerce, is you're not given the tool sets to kind of set you up for success in terms of a seamless experience. And that's why it's taken so long. Now, a lot of that is being unbundled, and it's making a lot of people unhappy and uncomfortable. And, that's what it's going to take. But it's crazy to think that just showing someone the price of their product is non-trivial amounts of work when you get to processing an insurance claim for a medication. And when you kind of juxtapose that with e-commerce, like, how can you build e-commerce without showing your price? It doesn't even make any sense. Right. But that's the reality we live in.
Yeah. I mean, the only way to know if GoodRx is going to work for me is to go to get the prescription. And then they say, that's $42. I say, well, I got a GoodRx thing here saying it'll cost me $12. Oh, okay. Then you can pay $12. And but they have to run it for me on my insurance and so forth. And they won't put GoodRx in there and just automatically, you got a better price with GoodRx and give it to me. No, I have to show them the card and all this stuff.
And you translate that to actually shopping for other things, and then it becomes even harder. You don't even know. Like just trying to get cost for one doctor, much less looking for a orthopedic surgeon and getting a knee arthroscopy procedure. You can't shop for that. It's nearly impossible.
Yeah, and like, this is the part where like you actually have a choice in the matter. If it's some kind of an emergency care, you are completely at the mercy of wherever you are, and like you have no choices.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully there's going to be a fundamental shift there as well, or naming and shaming as pricing comes out more transparently for those places that gouge.
Yep. We know that the prices are widely different. We just know that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like,
Really?
I've talked to some people who have been paying out of pocket for procedures, like no insurance whatsoever. They get quoted something, they're like, "Hey, I'll pay you what, like 5% of that," and the hospital's like, "Sure, that sounds good."
Wow.
Well, I mean,
It's what.
well, it's either that or you don't get paid. I think a lot of time. I mean, that's been problematic too. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
one of the things, so we talked a lot about technologies or companies that's taking off and benefiting from what's going on here. Are there any companies or technology you think that's gonna kind of are the losers in this, with what's going on here?
Well, don't be in travel. I mean, that would be a tough one. But
Well, yeah,
you mean within healthcare, right?
yeah. So I mean, before COVID, medical actually I think medical tourism had really taken off. Do you think this is going to get impacted?
What, to medical tourism to the U.S. or from the U.S.?
From the
From the
US.
U.S. I don't know.
Hmm.
It depends on the condition.
Yeah, I guess so.
It really does. I doubt a lot of people are going to go, down to Guatemala to have their genes read. Okay, but there are a lot of people that do that, and to get other therapies that we wouldn't pay for and don't offer here. I don't think if it's a heart attack and you got to travel to get the best care because you have a special this or that, yeah, I think people are going. So.
So any other companies or any other type of technology you think is a loser in this, what's going on
The
here?
simple way, and I've looked at this in many industries, starting with the computer business back in the 80s. And the very simple way to look at it is, I think, the best way, which is who stands to win the most if the status quo remains? And that's an easy answer, okay? And that you've just given the answer to your question, which is who stands to lose the most from this change that's going to occur? And if you believe the change is going to occur, and if you believe that big companies can't adapt, like I do, as a general rule, you all you do is say, who's going to benefit the most if it never happens? And that's the insurance companies, pharma, who sells drugs to everybody they could possibly get a doctor to encourage the guy to take, and so forth. All the drugstores that don't deliver or can't put together a delivery system that comes anywhere close to what Capsule can do. Okay, there's no reason to think of calling Walgreens if you live in New York. This doesn't make sense once you use Capsule.
Yep. Cool. Are there any questions from the audience? I see some folks here. I'm not sure if we're using the chat to field anything, or how does this work, Eugene?
So yes, so if this,
I'll open.
we're happy to take questions.
Hold on, I think we have some raised hands. How do I unmute them? We'll go with.
We know there are a lot of people on.
Yeah, here we go. We'll go with Jay Segal first, and then we'll go to Obi Rashid.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for taking the time this evening. One thing I'm curious about is the current increase in enthusiasm for Medicare for All. Do you think that this is it's at an all-time high based on polling? Do you think that's going to outlive the pandemic? And if so, are you doing anything in your own businesses to build resilience for that in the future?
I mean, I'm super biased in that I am a huge proponent for a single payer system. I spent a bunch of time over in the UK, and the NHS over there was like spectacular to work with compared to many situations I've had over here in the United States. So from that standpoint, like, I think it's like hands down the right idea to do. It would streamline and make things so much more efficient. We're thankfully not impacted by it one way or another, but personally, I would love for it to happen.
Yeah, there will be a lot of losers if we move into a single payer system. So going back to the earlier question, there will be a lot of pressure, and I think it goes back to an earlier point we mentioned, right? When there was a question around the reimbursement rate varying for telehealth and the variance on reimbursements for medication. In some ways, that variance is what allows the whole industry to thrive on that spread in profitability due to the opaqueness on how much you might get reimbursed for X, Y, and Z. Now, on the plus side, it wipes away all the confusion if you move to single payer, where you know exactly predictably what you'll get reimbursed for this drug or this procedure or this condition. And that gets to more predictable revenue models and scalable models. But there are a lot of people that live by that sort of opaqueness and ability to operate in that spread that you would disrupt. But I think for a startup, I'm totally in alignment with Dan that, yeah, if I don't have to monitor down to every NDC and every drug level, what our reimbursement rates look like and how they move over time, we don't have to, there'll just be a huge lift off our shoulders because we do have to worry about the spread and fluctuation of reimbursements because every party reimburses different for the same drug that we buy off the shelf from a manufacturer and wholesaler. So yeah, I mean, a lot of benefits, but a lot of people that will be left unhappy. And so just have to see how it plays out.
I'd love to see a single payer system too. I don't know whether we're going to get there anytime soon because of all this friction and all the problems that the people that are going to have to change with the evolution of medicine as we're talking about. Those people are going to be in bad shape. Look at the hospitals now. Hospitals are just losing tons of money. They stand to potentially lose a lot more if we go to single payer. And they're going to raise their hands and say, look, you can't do this to us. And I think it's going to be slow in coming. I do think, however, that we have proved that we have no answer to real public health. Okay, we have no, we can't run anything public health related to a virus. And look, COVID's a mess. It's a very difficult virus. It's morphing every 2 weeks. It's changing and so forth. But it's a virus. It's not. It's not something that could be a lot worse. This is an emergency, and we have failed in doing anything from testing to having a database of people and who's got tested, who's not. Look at any other country, almost any other country in that sense, and they blow us away. And we aren't even close. So I think that's got to get fixed. And I think it's obvious that's got to get fixed, and somebody's going to hang their hat on it and make it happen in Washington. I hope so. And so that's a start, because in a national health system, public health is just like, okay, we're going to decide what to do. And there's the infrastructure and the command and control is already set up because it's one system. You want to ration masks? Great, we'll ration masks. We'll take everybody to 90% of what they all were going to get. I mean, I simplistically say that, but I think it's it's directionally correct.
Kind of bouncing off of that, I am fascinated to see what happens when we start getting some vaccines for the coronavirus. And you're going to want to get that out to 328 million people across the US ASAP. I legitimately have no idea how this is going to go, but I'm fascinated to see.
That's great, guys. We'll take a couple more questions. We have Ulvi Rashid. Why don't you go next?
Sure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for this beautiful and wonderful, insightful discussion. My name is Ulvi Rashid. I am Tepper alum, class of 18, venture capitalist here in San Francisco, calling you from there. So I just spoke with a founder who is trying to disrupt clinical trial space, and he has to partner with many stakeholding groups within the space, even to get this initial traction. And I also noticed from all of your companies that you also had to partner with so many stakeholding groups in order to make your business model work. So I was just curious about how did you keep your focus? That's what all successful founders do, and I'll be very pleased to know more about your story about building this relationship with all those insurance companies and hospitals and pharmacies and everyone involved in your business.
I'm curious, is that founder that you spoke with Ram? Someone else?
No, it's a different founder.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
The clinical trial space is
I can
very
share
exciting.
offline. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll share it offline. I'd love to hear.
So could you tell me a little bit more about your personal experiences in your companies? What about like how did you keep focus in bringing all the stakeholding groups on your platform? Building these relationships, and
yeah, I think I can take a high level stab at that. Right, I think for us, we are now 3.5, almost 4 years old, and I don't think we've still solved this problem on focus and prioritization. We certainly always strive for ruthless prioritization, but as a B2B customer, I think what we're learning just going into year 3 and year 4 now of the business is there are large opportunities that you have to be willing to say no to. And that takes a long time to get comfortable with as a company. And as you mature and grow, to realize that you just can't do some things that are obviously good things for the business because you have to trade off for other things you have to focus and prioritize. I would say for the first few years of our business, we just focused on those few 2 or 3 or 4 customers that drove a majority of our revenue and a majority of our growth. And that was all we did. And that's all we focused on. And now as we try to come up for air, as we build to the next phase of growth, the same problem exists in terms of, well, we can try to work with a dozen different customers or just pick 1 or 2 for this quarter or this second half of the year. And so I think it just comes down to getting comfortable with saying no. And it's super scary in the early days. You just can't even imagine. It's not even scary. It's not plausible in the early days. As a startup, you cannot imagine saying no to a customer. It is not feasible. It's not in your DNA, frankly. And then as you get older, as a company and mature, you realize, yeah, you have to for the sake of the future state of the company. And that's just, that's our experience. But I'm sure Dan and John have their own versions.
Thank you.
That's absolutely correct. Like the hardest thing to do is say no to somebody who wants to give you some money if it's just not the right thing to do, whether you disagree with it from like an ethical standpoint, or if it's just not something that you have the technical capability to provide for them yet. But as for what keeps me motivated, this is really a personal mission for myself. In 2017, I have a chronic medical condition, and the medication I was on, I stopped responding to. I ended up getting hospitalized for a week over Thanksgiving. And as part of that hospitalization, I wasn't able to collect my medical records from a past specialist team to give to my current specialist team. And it resulted in me going through a bunch of invasive, unpleasant tests to confirm to people what I could tell them, but I didn't have a piece of paper stating. So I got out of the hospital, I was going through recovery, and my co-founder reached out to me and said, hey, I want to solve healthcare data interoperability, not having any idea of what I just went through. And I know, I'm just like, wow, what are the odds? I don't believe in fate, the universe speaking to me, kismet, or anything like that, but it was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. It was something that I saw myself being really passionate about. And so I gave up the cushy job working at Google and decided to go off and try to figure this out. So we spent a ton of time just figuring out what the technical and the policy landscape look like, and then eventually coalescing into what we have right now. And we just always keep the needs of the patient and the consumer to go off of John Sid's points earlier, because like these are people who are taking control of their own treatment. So like they're not a patient, they're not a victim, but yeah, just giving them the ability to exercise their rights afforded to them under HIPAA. And it's one of those things where you have all these rights under HIPAA, but do you know how to exercise them? And if you don't know how to exercise them, do you really have them? So that's our guiding light. Like we are consumers and patients ourselves, and that's what we always want to remain true to.
Thank you.
We've got 2 more questions, Eugene. So why don't we go with Malika, and then I believe Akash is next.
Thanks. Hi, this is Malika. I'm a current grad student at CMU. So my question is it'll take me a little time to explain, but the idea is, consumers want transparency on that platform with respect to the data that everybody holds, the doctors hold or the hospitals hold. But on the other side of the platform, you have doctors and hospitals who are comfortable with the current traditional way of keeping all the data on their local servers or beyond on the systems. And then you talk about electronic the data being passed around, and how what do you think would be the pushback from this, from the medical organizations, in terms of just thinking about the legality of it, like, another doctor looks at the previous diagnosis and he says like, hey, you know what, this was wrong. So just even the legal aspects of it, like, how do you think that's going to work out, and what pushback will telehealth and telemedicine receive from the traditional medical organizations in terms of the privacy and security, and just keeping them their data intact?
I think Dan, you would know most about this, right? What do you think will happen? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the nice thing is that all this policy is coming up that's going to be effectively forcing them to share this data and specifying like the actual privacy and everything that needs to be in place for it, what purposes of use the data can be shared for, what level of patient consent you need to do this actual sharing of data. And so from that standpoint, like it's reducing the number of complaints or edge cases they can use to get out of sharing data to patients who are requesting their data. I mean, like fundamentally, you own all of your medical data across the board, and everybody is just a steward of it. And the policy coming out is making that more crystal clear and telling you exactly how you can get access to your medical records, how you can use them to better your own care or make your life easier.
Thank you.
A great question. I love it.
Awesome. So our last question for the day, I mean, unless there are more, but the last one that we have right now is from Akash. So Akash, if you want to go off mute and ask your question.
Thanks, Jay. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So my question is about personalized medicine. So given that the barriers for data interoperability are slowly disappearing, I'm pretty sure there'll be companies out there looking to collect this data from customers, mine it and provide insights to them. So like what kind of insights would be, low-hanging fruits that companies might want to go after? Or like what are your general thoughts about trends in personalized medicine?
Well, one is that a lot of drugs either have an adverse reaction to people with certain predispositions, be they genetic or however else. And that's a really important thing. If you know about the adverse reaction before you take the drug, you can save a lot of problems, perhaps a life. Same thing with drug interactions. It gets real. This is really, really hard. Okay. But two drugs together might be great for Dan, but might not work for me, even though we have very similar genetics and both drugs look okay for each of us. But together, they're messing me up and they're fine for him. That happens. Mining that, understanding that would be a great value. Also, just whether drugs work. There are a lot of, I have allergies, and there's basically, in terms of non-drowsy, you've got Claritin, Zyrtec, and Allegra. And it seems to me, from just talking to people, one of those works for a lot of people. Some people, all of them work. One of them works for me, just one. Well, I wish I knew that, because I wasted years of my life itching my eyes after seeing a cat when I didn't have to. And that's a simple, a rather pedestrian example, but personalized medicine would be great for me to discover that with some medication that really mattered to my life. Imagine for blood thinners, there are 3 or 4 different choices. I mean, we could go on. I think that's all really, really important.
Yeah, my sense on this is like personalized medicine gets a lot of discussion, but it's only as good as the feedback loops that exist to drive that personalization. When you think about any kind of personalization model, you have to have those inputs into the model. And today, I don't think the infrastructure is there yet to get real-time sort of lab testing. Like you need to know hours, minutes, days after you take a drug, how your body responds to really have the true inputs to drive true personalized medicine. Now, I think the lab testing world is going to continue to evolve to help us get there. I think I'm seeing evidence on a different axis on the concept of a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, becoming more mainstream, that you don't need to wear it if you're just a diabetic. You can wear it as a healthy non-diabetic to start to understand your metabolic markers and things in your bloodstream then, and how you react to different foods or different medications, for example. So I think until you have these continuous feedback loops to begin to drive true personalized medicine, I think right now it's, in my experience at least, just in the discussion phase, but I'm certainly not the expert in personalized medicine at all, but that's our vantage point from the Truepill lens.
Some like really crazy privacy implications of all this that we're going to have to start working through as well. Privacy is definitely something that's on the forefront of everybody's minds right now. You have like GDPR. There's probably going to be a US-wide equivalent in the next year to 18 months, I want to say, just because a bunch of states, namely California, have been looking to do their own, and it would be hugely restrictive to US businesses to have to comply with 50 different states. Different policies, and so instead there's probably going to be a like more umbrella-based federal policy around that. So from that standpoint, like there's a lot of interesting capabilities, but at the same time, I think we're going to have to be like really careful as an industry to make sure that we're not going overboard with privacy from that standpoint. But just really, really fascinating stuff that's going to be capable that Sid John touched upon with like wearables, genomics, especially with like the ability to start editing your genome via CRISPR. CRISPR is going through a similar transistor-like growth right now with what capabilities it has. So like there's going to be a really interesting like renaissance of health capabilities coming up in the next decade, I'd say.
I want to throw a little like a cherry bomb here, and that is to mention the microbiome, which we haven't mentioned at all, but the internal bacteria in your gut, which changes over time, changes if you travel a great distance and go to a different culture and so forth. It's a really fascinating area that has a tremendous impact on what drugs get digested well, what food is metabolized, and how it's done. And that has a huge bearing on the personalized, the person you are from a medical standpoint, and the way you handle drugs, exercise, external stimuli, and so forth. And it just makes it's intensely complicated. It really is.
So we have one last one that you guys are just inspiring some great questions, and Raja asked us in the chat, but I'm going to ask him to come off mute and ask it himself.
Hey, John, Dan, and Sir. So you mentioned that in the COVID, your startups are thriving, and also other innovations like telehealth are also thriving. So what would the industry look like post-COVID? Are people going to go back to normal traditional settings, or would they keep going on to innovative methods? Like, how do you think the customers or consumers are going to respond to that post-COVID?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, if you've experienced telehealth for the first time, you want to go back to the old way of doing it would be my first question. And so I think, look, our bet is only as good as everyone's here, but I feel confident that if you experience telehealth for the first time during COVID, and we use this internal stat of we believe that I think 80% of all of healthcare can be done over telehealth or a digital channel, if you will, as soon as you introduce like more broad-based lab testing protocols. And so when you can do things from the comfort of your couch on a smartphone, and as John mentioned, asynchronously, this is a magical, easily 10x better experience, and arguably even greater. And so when you get to those 10x types of experiences, and you experience it for the first time, I don't think you go back. That's my take.
Mm-hmm. And what would you be doing as a startup owner to make sure that the customers are retained that you gained during the COVID era, or the businesses that you gained?
Pray? No, that's good.
Keep them happy. Do everything you can to keep your customers happy.
Mm-hmm.
And realize they're customers and not patients that came to you because they needed medical care and then they left. And hey, if they need me, they'll be back. That's not right.
Yeah,
That's not the world. They're customers.
Yeah, think of the way I would think about this is like, I think COVID created an acceleration of customer acquisition, but you can still model based on your normal retention curves, right? If you've been operating for years before this, look at your retention curves and understand what your models look like and where your patients are dropping off and churning off. And think of COVID as an accelerant for customer acquisition, driving these channels, and then follow your normal retention curves. And I think you'll stand to do well if you just follow your normal business procedures, and your normal retention curve should hold through. There's nothing that, I guess, let me put it this way. There's nothing that I know of today that would suggest that the retentive properties of patients acquired during COVID are different than ones that you acquired prior to COVID. Now, unless I'm disproven, and I could be, that's what I will hold still on until something changes my opinion on that. So open to you guys on what you think, John and Dan, that there's nothing materially different about the retention curves that we're seeing today, at least.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And in many cases, it's a better experience. You don't have to waste a half an hour driving, half an hour coming back, sitting in the office where you might or might not be wearing a mask and all nervous about COVID stuff. And even after COVID, you might still wonder what kind of bugs are in the air with 20 other people that are sick. So and if it's not really, really, really necessary that you see the doctor, you're going to be happy with a telemedicine visit. And in many cases, a telemedicine visit is getting a doctor when you've got the symptom present and you can talk about it. Unlike, oh yeah, I got this symptom, I got to go see a doctor. You go see the doctor and he says, what was it like? Were you conscious? Were you, my son had a neurological thing at one point. And the doctor said, well, was he conscious during this time? And I said, I think so. Well, and then kept asking all these questions. Look, I don't know the answer. Next time he had one, I filmed it. And this was 10 years, more than 10 years ago. It was like a godsend. I showed them the film. That's a telemedicine visit, asynchronous. But it basically was because that was the heart and soul of the visit. My son showing them what he was experiencing during the moment. There's no substitute for that. Zero substitute. It's a much better experience for that kind of thing. But you learn that, and then all of a sudden, it's a better deal. It's a better thing.
All right, folks, I think we will, we've already taken up more than an hour of our panel's time. We have one last question, so we'll go with Ada. Am I pronouncing that right? If you want to come off mute and correct me, that'd be great.
Hi, yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I just finished my PhD at CMU in the Robotics Institute, working on machine learning with wearable devices for Parkinson's motor symptom monitoring. So I have a lot of interest both in machine learning and healthcare. And I feel like there is a huge amount of untapped potential for machine learning to maybe solve some of the issues of personalization we were just talking about, but also like drug and therapy development. Like there's so much potential, but I think a lot of it is hampered by a paucity of data. Like when you look at ML and what it has done in healthcare, it's nowhere near what we've been seeing in like self-driving cars or computer vision. And I think it's because everybody's struggling to get data. I mean, I had to collect my own data set, which was time consuming. So I completely understand that privacy is super important, security of your data is super important, and yet somehow I think we're gonna need to open things up a little bit so that we can take the next step. And I'm just curious, what do you guys think is going to happen? How will this data become available for machine learning? Do you guys think there's a time scale for this? Will there be data sharing? I'm just interested in your guys' input on this.
Yeah, so that is definitely one of the large questions right now. And this kind of touched a little bit on earlier what we were talking about privacy, specifically around genomics. Like when you talk about certain things like self-driving cars, you have these fleets of vehicles that you're collecting data from, and that's fine. Like not many people are going to get judged on that. But when it comes to genomics, that's where you have the capability to like truly judge someone and impact their life down the line if that information were ever to get out. But it doesn't just stop there. Your genomics aren't just your information. it's the information of everyone that you're directly related to as well. So for instance, if I were to get my genome sequenced and then open that up to the public domain, any children I had, my parents, potentially siblings, would have their information out there as well without their consent. And like, let's say one of them got discriminated against for a health insurance or life insurance policy as a result of that, because there weren't stringent enough rules in place to prevent that from happening. So I think it's going to be really hard to get medical data in large volumes to do those machine learning capable applications until you have a framework in place to ensure that things are sufficiently de-identified, which is almost impossible if you like study like TENY and anonymization and all that fun stuff, or until there's like no risk to having that information out there.
Cool, thank you. Out of curiosity, do you have any like guess for what a timeline would be before we can like put in these protocols to take the next step?
That is a great question. I don't know. I think you're going to start seeing some large players in the space start building up their corpus of data and keep it very closely to themselves as a proprietary data set through whatever mechanisms they can. And it'll potentially be hampered by a bunch of new privacy policy and stuff like that. But like, I suspect that groups are already doing this and just being very quiet about it. So I think like there will be like a health data corpus arms race at some point in the near future, driving a lot of that, especially like as people are seeing the potential of ML and other, like, it's not just ML, it's like there's so many different things you can do with that data. You can do like retroactive studies to reclassify drugs, remove the need for various trials and things like that. And so there's huge value in it. And I think that it's going to cause a lot of unethical behavior as a result of it.
Very interesting. Thank you. Well, you should still still stay in healthcare, though, Ada. Don't give up on that.
Yeah. Don't go into the car business.
Don't the self-driving cars. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure if that's the honest truth. I think it's going to take some time, and
it's so worth it. Though.
Like, yeah, it's a long haul. Like, you got to play the long game.
So I think, and Jay, I think we've covered every question, right?
I believe so. If there are questions left over, we can maybe address them in the Slack, and we'll get it to the right panelists to make sure we get your questions answered. So if you're taking a shower later tonight and you go, oh man, I should have asked John that, you can send it to us over Slack. We'll get it over to John.
Yep.
I have a quick question actually for Ada. Was the study the work you did, was that in comparison with a Parkinson's therapy that was being administered, or just in general?
No, it was in general. So we were trying to just enable, like, currently the gold standard for monitoring is patients might do like paper diaries at home. But basically you go to your neurologist every 3 to 6 months and do like, you have 15 minutes. And in those 15 minutes, the neurologist is like, okay, can you do this? Can you do this? How are things going? And because the disease progresses, they're actually titrating medication based on this like super short amount of insight into your life. So we were trying to build something that could just like, say like Fitbit, automatically track your symptoms. You could give your clinician information about your motor symptoms at a higher frequency, higher resolution. And honestly, like, there is definitely a lot of interest in, say, symptom monitoring, symptom analysis, automated, but very little on continuous monitoring. And that is because it is just super difficult to get labeled data of symptoms occurring. So
what's the magnitude of labeled data you would need to solve this problem, just out of curiosity?
That's a really good question. And you know what also is a good question is, what does it mean to solve the problem? Because in healthcare, you know, you have all these like machine learning algorithms, and they're like, okay, we have 90% accuracy. is that good enough? Actually, nobody knows. When you ask clinicians, like, what's going to be the accuracy we need, it's so difficult to get an answer. So it's hard for me to answer you for like, what's the, how much data, when it's even hard to answer what is considered solved.
Got it. Then maybe one way to, if you go back to first order principles here, like the way I would unbundle your problem to think about is, if you look at the incentives of that patient suffering from Parkinson's, or the patient that's providing care, that's where you have your strongest intent, right? So if you reverse engineer the problem to create a direct-to-consumer type of experience where these patients are providing the data set themselves, or their caregivers providing the data set, in hopes of achieving a better clinical outcome or better clinical data or better insight, then, you know, in the beginning, it's going to be hard to stitch it together. And that's why I don't know how much data you need. Like if you told you need tens of millions of data points, but if you could stitch together some models that operate off thousands of patients, for example, then you have something that's attainable in terms of, you need to go acquire these Parkinson's patients one by one, but you can unbundle the kind of the problem from reverse of, instead of waiting for the data set to arrive, build an offering directly for that patient that you can solve, and get them to provide their data set and self-select into it, which I think will solve it in maybe reverse order while you, as opposed to waiting. So just a thought there.
I mean, is there a possibility that you could bundle your solution or your, to say something like, we were talking about Fitbit, or even Apple Watch, right?
Yes.
There's already a lot of data that's being collected
right.
From these devices, and maybe that would be something that may address some of your data collection problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So my PhD, I looked into using weekly supervised learning. So a lot of the standard methods are you would have to know the exact start and end of every single symptom. Like, this was symptomatic and this was not symptomatic. And that kind of data is extremely expensive to obtain, because you typically have to be in the laboratory with cameras, with somebody like annotating. And it takes me about like 4 hours to annotate 1 hour of data. So it's just like super time consuming. So we were looking at weekly supervised data, meaning you ask the patient, hey, in the past like 5 minutes, about how much did you experience your symptoms? And then we were developing machine learning algorithms on top of that. So yeah, you guys are absolutely right. And I personally think that the weekly supervised data is probably the future, because that's how you can get true like in-home natural movement, as opposed to laboratory movement, which may not actually mimic how you're moving at home or how your symptoms are experienced at home. So there's that. And I think there are like a bunch of different ways you could get weekly labeled data, but right now the infrastructure isn't quite there. Yeah.
Should figure out how to do this over telehealth, like do it recorded over a video recording in their home, and do it every day if you need to. And so there's lots of cool, it's a very cool problem. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Congratulations on graduating.
Yep.
Awesome
Thank
work.
you.
So I think with that, I think if we don't have any questions, I'm gonna thank the panelists. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I'm hoping everybody else did too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for organizing. This has been really fun.
Been good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.